Thank you, Dr. Myers. That was wonderful, beautiful, absolutely. So I'd like to respond in two basic sections. The first one has to do with my upbringing and how I identify with some of the things we've seen in the presentation. And the second part has to do with what I think it means, not only for parts of sub-Saharan Africa, but also Christendom in general. Like, what do we take from this? What does it mean? So I'm from Tennessee, from Memphis, Tennessee, born and raised. And it's they call it, when I was growing up, they called it the city of churches. And the running joke was, on every corner, basically, you could see a church. And growing up there and not knowing anything else, I thought, well, come on, can it be that many? Then I moved away. And now when I go back, I think, like, oh my gosh, look at all these. It's like everywhere you see these churches. So it begs the question, with this many, you might say, safe houses, what's going on? Yep. If you have all these spots, what's happening in terms of the population? Why do you see certain ills? Okay, so I grew up in a very conservative Christian family. Most of my family members were Pentecostal. So it's very, when they say you go to church all day, you start early. So I didn't understand as a kid why we had to go so long, right? But it rubbed off on me in many ways. But I remember this when I was in high school. This would have been like the 80s, right, when hip-hop's becoming mainstream, how there was this divide. And I didn't know it at the time, but this divide had been there a long time. It was a generational divide. Yes. And it was one by which we, as youngsters, felt like, we have the music that we really like, and then there's the stuff we can sing in church. We have the stuff that speaks to us, and there's the stuff that our parents won't, get upset of us or get upset with us over this stuff. So it was always, it never felt like church music ever caught up. Like wherever was hip, it's like it's out there. And preachers used to say this. I used to hear this as a kid. They would say things like, it's funny now. They say, why should the devil have all the good music? Right. And, it's interesting because when you start looking at it, you think, well, but this is before I knew anything about the history of gospel. I'm just talking about my life and without academic treatment. So I always felt that, the music was more advanced, you might say, or connected outside of it. There was an artist, though, that came on the scene, and he slowly worked his way into the church canon. That's Kirk Franklin. I'm sure you've heard his music, right? So I remember when we first hit, and the young people, we were like, this is it. Finally, it's about time, right? Because on one hand, he had one foot in like the traditional side with the whole choir thing, but he's taking his cue from an artist that probably in most churches they would never talk about, but a lot of people are listening to, George Clinton's Parliament Funkadelic. Oh my goodness! If you haven't heard this stuff, it was like the anthem of my childhood. And so many black communities in the United States, that was the sound in the 70s, 80s, right? And so when he starts to take his cue from George Clinton, yet have the message of Christ and the saving grace, that was like, finally, we've got it together. But we didn't know it was going to be such a resistance against that. But for the older people in the church, they felt like, and I wrote this down, I think the confusion was that we get connected so much with the form and we forget about the content. So we think more about, well, what does it sound like? And I've heard people get up and even give sermons on how this stuff is devilish and you can't praise God, rapping, and you can't, have a worship led by this kind of music, seeing it as being an offense, right? Okay, so again, being a child and not studying ethnomusicology yet, I didn't quite get it, but I knew that something was amiss. So fast forward now in my life as an academic. And so looking at the history of gospel, I know now that when gospel, what the elders said was safe, if you could time travel back to when Thomas Dorsey was first doing it, African American gospel, it was not accepted. The same thing they said about Kirk Franklin, they said the same thing about Thomas Dorsey. This is devil's music. You can't bring this stuff in here. We won't allow it. How funny over time that became like, oh, no, that's good old gospel, right? So it's interesting. I think generationally, it probably will change as kind of the natural attrition, right? The older heads, unfortunately, die off, and the young ones come in and they have positions of authority, and they will say, what they didn't like, we're okay with that. And so I think it will, But it doesn't mean that problem goes away, because I think we start looking at generations after them, you might see this same resistance unless we hit it and target it in our conversations. So 3 challenges I think I wanted to address. The first one has to do with where is that? This kind of confluence of culture and theology. So we know in most of the colonized world, Christendom is spreading with Eurocentric values, right? But there's very little critical analysis of, okay, what is actually the content, what is actually the form? It's like they're wrapped together. So when you're taught about Christ, rather than think of the actual Christ and where he was, he becomes kind of, Europeanized. We all know this, right? We rarely talk about it. When I go to church and I look at churches that I grew up in, they were very segregated. And I say that and with all kind of pain, the one place where there should be unity. The world has their way, but in this house, it won't look like that. Why is it that most houses of worship don't reflect that? Something must be going on. Either we're just not talking about it, we refuse to address it. Now, let me say this, and I'm not just saying this about the church. I mean, I'm at a university, and I think some of the same blindness shows up. We oftentimes talk about and celebrate diversity. If you look at any mission statement, how about this? I talk to my young students about this. Go to most university college websites, and what they'll probably put is a handful of their undergraduates all wearing like sweatshirts of the school in front of some landmark. There'll be an African-American one, an Asian one. You know what I mean? We've all seen it. And the idea behind that is this is good. That we're open to everyone. Come on in. Now, I joke with them about this one. These are undergraduates. I'm trying to get them to critically think about where are you and what's really going on. So I said, well, it would be great if they can pull the administration out of their offices, put them in front of the... Show me diversity, right? So this idea of what do we really want? So you can have diversity without inclusion. You can say, come on in, but when you come on my terms. So you can come and say, well, God doesn't see color, but we do. Right? God doesn't see gender, but we do. So this idea that we are wrapped in this thing, and I think it's been going on so long, it's like you become numb to it. Right? So I think sometimes you step outside of your experiences and think about this. So the first challenge, again, is how do we separate those things or think about culture, right, versus what do we believe, and how has our cultural influences affected that, right? The second one I thought about in relation to what she's dealing, the whole idea that, this idea about tradition, right? So looking at tradition as a source of inspiration. And certainly when we think about crate digging, a lot of hip hop, DJs were going back to sounds that existed even before their time and using them as a way to draw and create something new. Looking back, yet moving forward. And you mentioned jazz and stuff. Yeah, that's exactly what jazz musicians do. We're always studying what came before us, but we don't stop there. We're trying to push it forward. And there's a spirit of the music that says we have to get younger ones. That we can't just stop and say, I've arrived, now I'm done, I got the gig, give me the award. But my job isn't done unless there's someone coming after me. And here's the thing about jazz also. They have to come after me and be different than I am. They can't come and play exactly what I played. If they did, we don't want copies. We don't want people to say, look out and say, no, you find your voice. And what is it? And I think when we're true to that spirit, it will naturally draw people in. So I know I'm preaching to the choir, more or less, but when we think about diversity and think about hip hop, I think oftentimes it's discarded by generations. And this is also, I think, both racial and within African-American communities. In other words, there's some older African-Americans that will discard hip hop the same way, say, an elderly white person might do the same thing because they see it as being unlike what they're used to. But again, I wish we were educated more on where gospel came from. Once I learned that, and I thought, okay, if we think about this concept, we keep coming to the same thing over and over and over again. But I think most of us aren't necessarily aware of that. So we just feel like what we know is the right way. And anything else that's unlike that, we can very easily say, but rather than get to the heart of it and say, well, I'm just not used to that, we say, no, that's wrong. In much the same way the Europeans, when they began enslaving Africans, saying, your way is sinful, right? Even though they're saying, but we're worshiping God, the God that we're worshiping him. Yeah, but he doesn't like that. As opposed to, we don't like that. They're speaking on behalf of, so it gets convoluted, right? So I think we need to have these discussions. Otherwise, I don't think it ever really goes away. But, as a musician, I oftentimes think about this and how music is very much like, we know that music is an important part of culture, right? Well, how important is music in culture? It's up there with food. It's up there with language, right? So when you think about, what makes us who we are, certainly it's something, what we put in our bodies, how we dress, the language we use. So if we are fishers of men and women and children, then it would make sense that we use the things that would attract them. It's kind of a no-brainer. Like, why would you say to a fish, I'm going to put the bait on it that I like? and you need to bite it, right? And if you don't bite it, you're going to hell. And so it's this sense of just thinking, what do we need to do, right? And so it's kind of like a business. In some ways, talking about food again, I tell my students all the time, while I love Southern cooking, and I grew up with it, I don't eat it every day. I don't have it every day. And if I did eat it every day, now I would grow sick of it. Like, diversity, and that's part of our humanity. I think we're kind of built for that, right? Because if you think of how pluralistic our world is and God's creator of it, then naturally he likes diversity, right? If you're looking at his creation and you see all this difference, how could we then say that one is supreme and the others are actually on their way to trying to get better, but they're inferior? Then what you're really doing is insulting the creator. We think we're doing it to other people, but you're really saying to God, I know better than you. And when we're more powerful. So certainly when I look at music, I think it's a very powerful thing. When I talk to my undergrads and ask them about what does music mean, and sometimes they're a little bit away with this, I say, well, how about we had a conversation like this? I said, play for me your favorite song. I might say this, play for me your jam. Okay. At the end of that session, if I looked at them and said, you like that? Really? Now, how would that make anyone feel? You would feel like, I'm not known. I'm not validated. Why? Because our music is very personal. When you say, this is my music, you're saying, this is me. So if someone discredits it, they're saying, you are not worthy. Now, flip this other side of it. You play your jam for me, I listen and go, that's some beautiful stuff. Yeah, thank you for playing that. That changed my life. How do you feel about me as a person? Wouldn't you want to listen to me at that point? Wouldn't you want to have a conversation? It's simple, right? Just kind of human nature. But I think when we look at the church, it's been so top down for so long. And if we grow up in this mentality, we won't ever stop to really question it. We kind of get brought up and you think this is how it is. And I think that's why across Christendom, a lot of the churches are decreasing in terms of population. Not because the message has gone away, but how do we do it, right? How do we convey it? And how does that change over time? So I will stop here. But thank you for your presentation. It was wonderful. I learned a lot, absolutely. And I teach hip-hop, so it's definitely in my heart to think about how this music is really, really powerful. Look at the world and you think, yeah, it's powerful. We can't deny it. Unfortunately, in most academic circles, other than conferences, we don't really teach it. That to me is also like, you got this thing that's changing the world, and we get in the ivory tower, and we don't talk about it. Yeah, so anyway, sorry to go off on that. But thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Mi yeti sheni do